Okay, hello. It's been a while since we've had a live stream. Really looking forward to discussing what we just got to discuss. Six Nations has now been impacted by the coronavirus, as has Formula One and football. The Italy Ireland games in Dublin, both the men's and women's Six Nations games, have now been called off provisionally under advice from the Irish Health Ministry. The Chinese F1 Grand Prix in April has already been postponed, and we have no idea when they're going to race that race. We know that the Six Nations, women's Six Nations, already been affected last weekend because the coronavirus is now in Italy. Infantino, the president of UEFA, has also come out. Oh, sorry, the president of FIFA has also come out and said it will impact football at some point, and it's going to have a much wider impact on global sport. Also in the news this week, Maria Sharapova has retired from tennis at the age of 32, possibly one of the least loved tennis players by her peers, and she divides fans as well. So that's interesting. I've been watching Major League Rugby. The first three rounds have been really, really fun. Obviously, the fourth round of games is being played this weekend. I've been really interested to see the amount of yellow cards dished out. There's been a lot of yellow cards. I think in every single game there's been at least one yellow card, sometimes multiple yellow cards. They're very, very strict on how many penalties can be given away before yellow cards are dished out. Sometimes it can happen within a few minutes. So that's been really interesting to watch how that plays into things. But on the biggest talking points are Maria Sharapova's retirement and the lack of response on social media from fellow tennis players. I think she's one of the least respected or loved women's champions within the playing group of top professional tennis. And she's one of the few female tennis players to have had all four Grand Slam titles. She's in a select bunch in that regard, but the fact she only won 5 Grand Slams in her career is surprising to me. I thought she'd won more. Deontay Wilder take on Tyson Fury. There is a three match deal, but it looks highly likely that Deontay Wilder probably will not take up the option for that third fight. He was utterly battered in the bout. I mean, utterly outclassed. The fact it went along as long as it did is surprising. He was absolutely destroyed. It was a technical knockout by stoppage. I didn't watch the fight. I'm not a big fan of boxing anymore. I've really gone off boxing over the last few years. It's a sport that I've fallen out of love with. There's a few sports like that I've fallen out of love with over the recent times. It looks highly likely that Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury will fight before the end of this year, whether they do it in December or November time. That's the most likely time that these two men will face each other. It's interesting to see what happens. I mean, Eddie Hearn is, well, not a desirable human being, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of how the Hearns market their fights and the amount of pay-per-views you got to have, especially if you've already got a sports subscription. It's very notable that in the past, more people have watched via VPN than actually paid for the pay-per-view. I think boxing is at a crossroads. And while there are lots of boxing fans out there that are really looking forward to Wilder Fury rematch, I don't think it's very, very likely considering how dominant Fury was in that last fight. I mean, it was so one-sided. It was not even funny by the end, I think. The outcome was pretty well known from very early on in the fight. And what Deontay Wilder turned up into the ring wearing, good God, and his excuses are piss poor, absolutely piss poor, completely badly prepared and deservedly beaten. How they're going to market Joshua versus Fury, I mean, I think this fight should have possibly taken place when Tyson Fury had won the world titles the last time. But obviously we know about Tyson Fury's outside the ring issues with health. And while I'm not a massive fan of Tyson Fury, I have to appreciate a man who's come clean about his health issues and addiction problems and has taken his punishment and come back better. Anthony Joshua, I think there's also a rematch clause with Ruiz Jr. I don't like these multiple, rematches. I think once you're done with an opponent, you're done on the fixturing there. I think that's another thing that boxing needs to get away from is, I've lost, I want to have another pop at it. No, you've been decisively beaten. This is where I'm not a big fan of how they promote boxing right now, is the constant, we'll sign a 3-fight deal with these two fighters. I think once it's done, it's done. It's just a money-making exercise, and I'm not really overly enamored with that, but it is what it is. Obviously, the Houston Astros scandal in Major League Baseball is still ongoing as well, and that, I think, has severely damaged Major League Baseball and its image, not just in the US but overseas. This is a major league that's had a lot of scandal in its history, a lot of labor unrest with the players, lockouts, strikes, many collective bargaining agreements. We've had the steroid scandal. We've had individual players involved in scandal, and now we obviously have a whole team involved in basically cheating. The way the Major League Baseball have dealt with it, I don't think it's strong enough. I think the fact they're allowed to keep their World Series title is one. 2020, the coronavirus, we'll get on to that. We know that already Six Nations is affected. The Chinese F1 Grand Prix is affected. We know that matches have been played behind closed doors or postponed in football. I think what we've seen, if you look at the statistics, is cases are now falling in China. I think we might have had the peak in the amount of people per week getting infected. It's not actually as dangerous as an illness as the media is portraying. The percentage of people infected to percentage of people who actually die from the disease, you have to have a pre-existing health condition. I think it's been blown out of proportion by the media, which hasn't helped and created unnecessary panic. But what we have seen is with other really serious diseases like, AIDS and HIV, people still have unprotected sex, even though millions of people worldwide are infected and millions of people have died from that particular virus. So I do think the media aren't helping the situation. If you look at coronavirus, 90% of people who have it probably don't even know they've got it. Those that do show bad symptoms, most of them, recover, and it's a very small proportion. I think it's about 2% mortality rate. I mean, regular flu infects millions more people a year, hundreds of millions a year, and kills thousands in each country every year. But it has impacted. We don't know when Italy, Ireland, in both the men's and women's Six Nations will be played. Last time we saw Six Nations matches postponed was when the foot and mouth outbreak happened in Europe in 2001, where Ireland played their 3 remaining games in the autumn instead of the autumn internationals. I don't know how they're going to do it this time around with refixturing these matches, but time will tell. The interesting thing is the Italy-Ireland games have been played in Ireland, and the Irish Health Ministry have advised the organisers to postpone and refixture the fixtures. The Olympic Organising Committee is an interesting one because at the moment they've got contingency plans in place. I think by the time the Olympics rolls around in August, the outbreak would have died down to normal, background levels. I do know about the football matches being played behind closed doors or postponed in Italy. That's had a massive impact. I know you follow the Serie A quite religiously. But if you are living south of Rome and you play football or rugby, your matches are going ahead. It's if you live north of central Tuscany, so if you draw a line across the middle of Italy between Italy and Milan, you draw a line between Rome and Milan, you draw a line on the map. If you live north of there, you have to quarantine yourself if you have symptoms. If you are traveling out of Italy and go to another country, you have to quarantine yourself, or if you show symptoms, you have to quarantine yourself. And that's where sport's been affected. Now, from what I understand, the Italian players who play in Italy, the 2 Italian teams in the Pro 14 are based in northern Italy, hence probably why the Irish Health Ministry has recommended that the games in Dublin next weekend do not go ahead. When they refix those 2 Women's Six Nations games and the Men's Six Nations game, and whether that affects the rest of the Six Nations going forward, we'll have to wait and see. We know that the French authorities are getting quite concerned, but I think it's being overhyped by the media. We know that I think that's creating a panic, which is unnecessary. but it is starting to affect sport. Infantino has come out and said like football will be affected at some point. Whether that affects Euro 2020, we'll have to wait and see. But again, that's in the summer, and the flu season is generally the winter. So hopefully, by the time these major tournaments roll around, it's died a death. But the Olympics, I mean, they are really, the IOC are terrible at these kind of things. You have to look at the history of the IOC when it comes to political or health issues. They are pretty useless. I'm not gonna lie. We've seen nations boycott. We've seen all sorts of things with the IOC in its history. Multiple scandals involving the IOC and the Olympics. So I think what we're seeing is the lack of action from the IOC and the Olympic organisers is pretty standard fare for that kind of sporting event. But the organisers in Japan say there are contingency plans in place, and we'll see what happens. Rugby is not as popular south of Rome, I will admit that. As having been to Italy so much, I have seen more rugby, obviously, in the north of Italy with stadiums and signposts for rugby clubs and things like that. But the rugby is played in the south of Italy. We have had players play for the national side who come from Sicily and the southern half of Italy, but it is less popular, partly because financially in the south of Italy it's not as wealthy. Football is the main sport. And outside of football, sport in south of Italy is limited in a sense, but it's to do with funding rather than lack of willingness from people to participate. But the infrastructure with Italian rugby is Rome northwards. And that's one of the reasons why I think where the Italians do their training camp, where the players are based, it is having an impact. And we'll see what happens. The thoughts on Israel Folau. As a player, I have no issue with him playing in the Super League or the NRL. None. It's what happens off the field. And he's one of those controversial, divisive figures. I think we've reached a point now where he is playing. He has played for Catalan. He scored in his debut. They have changed the rules now for future players who have issues off the field. I've done so many videos on Israel Folau for the last 2 years. They're very controversial. They're very divisive. A lot of spiel about human rights and rights to religion and a lot of homophobic responses from some people. But he's a divisive character. I don't think you're going to change him. But Catalan have been told that if he steps out of line, they're going to be fined. He's been told if he steps out of line, he loses his job. This is his last chance saloon. I can't see him, if he says something off the cuff or he does something controversial off the field. It doesn't matter if it's social media or if he actually gets involved in, say, a drink driving incident. He is done. That's the remit that the RFL have given Catalan. He's got to behave. But on the field, we know what he's capable of. We've seen what he's done in a variety of codes. It's just interesting that the NRL and Super League didn't deregister him. They didn't actually think to do that. So the controversy that's happened since he's been signed is interesting. I think the way Rugby Australia dealt with the situation, the way Israel Folau carried on, I think all parties in that respect failed over the last 2 years. So 2 years ago, when he first came out with his online rant, I'll call it a rant because I think he was in a contract negotiation with Rugby Australia. He forced their hand. He got his contract as well, which is interesting. People say he was treated harshly. I think it was the reaction from the LGBTQ plus community, and I've got loads of gay friends. I've got friends who are trans, bisexual, gay, lesbian. The LGBTQ plus community and all the other add-ons, I think, are a toxic social group in themselves. They say pride's all about inclusiveness. I'm going to try. I can't say the word. And respect and lack of labels. Yet they constantly come up with these new labels, and they're very toxic towards each other. But their response, and the response from the fact that Australian politicians got involved, the way that Rugby Australia dealt with it really did not go well. It dragged on. He got his contract. He did it again, which makes you wonder why they gave him that massive contract. At the same time, they cut the funding for Western Force, which was roughly the same amount of money that they were giving him in his contract. The amount of funding at Western Force were requesting to be a viable Super Rugby franchise, which means we lost Nick Cummings, the Honey Badger from Super Rugby, which is a shame because one of my favourite players. Plays a similar role to Israel Folau. He can play in the centres, he can play on the wing, he can play a fullback. Far more, I would say, loved player. So we lost Nick Cummings, the Honey Badger from Super Rugby, which is a crying shame because Israel Folau got greedy. I think the way it was handled, yes, badly. Was he treated fairly or not? I think we have seen, yes, players with uh, you know, with violent offences, gambling offences, match fixing allegations in a variety of sports. It's not just rugby union, rugby league. The the way it was handled was poor, and the way that it carried on was damaging, and it did have an effect on Australia at the World Cup, and it did cost Michael Chaker his job, no doubt. It was one of the reasons why Rugby Australia decided to move on from Michael Chaker, I think, which I think was a really poor decision. Could you blame Israel Folau's absence on Australia struggling at the World Cup? No. There are far more issues with rugby union in Australia than just Israel Folau and some controversial comments. Massive issues with rugby union in Australia, but the fact it carried on for so long, gained momentum of its own. Other players got involved for and against him. The governance of the sport was just, well, in Australia was poor. The comments from various groups, not just the LGBT community, but across the spectrum in the media, it really became divisive. Even those who didn't even give a toss about rugby union and rugby league in Australia, let's say AFL fans, across the sporting spectrum got involved. It is what it is. It's done now. We have to move on. I do think both parties need to be more tolerant. I personally myself, I'm an atheist. I've got friends who are religious, and they know my views on it. I think sport and politics should be as separate as possible. It reached the political level. It's caused grave damage to the image of Rugby Australia from all sides as an organisation that has a pragmatic approach. It doesn't. It's a badly run organisation, and it does get government assistance in Australia. It does. I'm going to have a Twix, having some breakfast, but no, I do think it could have been much better handled by all parties. And whoever's advising Israel Folau didn't help his case, because obviously he was saying, I want to play at the World Cup, I want to keep playing rugby. He's now playing a different code, and he's I think done it. I mean, will he be still playing when the Rugby League World Cup runs around? Which nation will he represent? Because he's eligible to represent, I believe, Samoa or Tonga. And will the Tongans or the Samoan RFL be interested in? Oh God, this is a controversial figure. Will they want to take that risk, considering that especially Tonga are on the verge of being one of the top nations in rugby league? It's a thing. Oh, because atheists have a brain. We're calm about these things. Absolutely. On the Olympic side of things, just ate my chocolate bar. When we had SARS and MERS, swine flu, bird flu, and all that, the Olympics went ahead. So, on the coronavirus thing, I think the media are over egging it, and they're using that to get clicks on their websites, sell their publications, get people to watch their news channels. I think it has been overblown. So we'll see what happens. But the IOC, when it comes to controversial decisions, generally make pretty poor decisions in the end. So we'll see what happens. But the coronavirus was known about when the Rugby Union World Cup was actually being played in Japan. So I don't know what will happen, but I think it is being overblown by the media. The most at-risk groups are young kids, the elderly, and those with pre-existing conditions. So it's like the flu virus, except a little bit more, I wouldn't say virulent, but your standard flu virus, the same advice is given out. Young kids, elderly, those with pre-existing conditions are more at risk of dying or having severe complications. It's just another form from the same group of viruses. It's less dangerous than SARS and MERS in the sense that the mortality rate is a lot lower, but it is obviously easier to transmit. But at the end of the day, food like stomach bugs, tummy bugs, flu. You have to look at it. The advice is exactly the same as the advice they give for flu. The fact they're quarantining whole towns and cities is bananas. I think it's an overreaction. I understand why they're doing it because it is a new virus that has mutated, but it's far less serious than SARS or MERS. Just look at the yes, more less cases were officially recorded, but you look at the percentage of people who actually have a mortality rate. And the Olympics went ahead in those circumstances, even though that virus was around and people were getting infected at the time. So the Salt Lake City Olympics with SARS, MERS, I think it was it Rio? The Zika virus with Rio Olympics, they over-egged that. They really over-egged that as well, and that's still infecting more people globally every year than coronavirus as it is, or COVID-19 or whatever it is. So I think the media has a responsibility, but when sporting figures are coming out and saying it is affecting our matches, we are postponing games, we are refixturing things behind closed doors, we're postponing events. If the Chinese F1, the Six Nations, and football globally are now being affected, if the IOC Olympic organisers don't do something, if they have to do the events behind closed doors, so be it. The TV audience will still be there. People will still watch. So we'll see what happens. Myself, I'm not overly concerned. Oh yeah, China is. I've watched documentaries on it. It's mad. I watched the Four Corners investigation. It's insane. I've got friends out in China right now. Absolutely bananas. But the F1 organisers postponed their Chinese Grand Prix long before we got to the 2004 fatality rate. Long before. F1 Grand Prix was like about 3 weeks ago. They were like, no, we're not racing in April. It's what it is. I think we'll have to see how it plays out, but I love the white Twix. It's brilliant. I should keep making these. But at the end of the day, you got to try that white Twix. It's beautiful. At the end of the day, the fact it's now affecting sport is where this conversation comes in. If it wasn't affecting sport, I probably wouldn't do a video on it. I'm going to be doing a video on how it's affecting sport later today. Where's my bill? I've got bills to pay yet, but later today I'll be doing a video on how it's affecting sport and how it could affect other sporting events. And yes, the Olympics will be on that list of events that could be affected. I have no doubt that by the time the Olympics rolls around in Euro 2020, the virus has died down, the infection rate has dropped, and we're back to normal. And a vaccine will probably have been developed by that point, when it's already too late. But we saw this with SARS, we saw this with MERS, swine flu, bird flu. The media over-egging things. Treat it like a normal flu virus. Take the normal precautions, good hygiene, stay away from sick people. If you have an underlying health condition, make sure you keep up with your medications and all that kind of stuff. Internationals, Tonga, I think, have deserved it, both on league or union. It doesn't matter. I think Tonga have deserved it. They have some really good players. But the important thing, if you're going to have these kind of internationals against tier 2 nations in the autumn tests, you have to do revenue sharing of the ticket sales. If this is, I think, where rugby's got it wrong, where World Rugby came out with their idea to change the international calendar. You don't have to change the international calendar. All you have to do is make sure the players are paid fairly. And when we were playing Fiji a couple of years ago, it was the £20,000 per appearance for an England player, £500 per appearance for a Fijian player. That's where you just got to do revenue sharing. There is a call for it from the fans. There's a call for it from vast sections of the media. And if you want to have a global sport which is competitive at all levels, where smaller nations with a smaller playing base, for example, or less finances can compete against the best, you have to do revenue sharing. End of. You don't have to change the international calendar too much. You don't want to be like football and follow another sport where, that hasn't necessarily worked. You just got to do revenue sharing. The Bucks winning the NBA, I haven't followed enough. I don't really follow the NBA. I mean, the Kobe Bryant, passing, I think, was the big NBA story of the year. But playoffs is a lottery, quite literally. If you look at my NHL videos, you just look at the NHL playoffs over the last couple of years. It's complete and utter. Once you make that playoff stage, anything's possible. Anything. And we've seen teams completely choke it in the playoffs when they're heavily fancied. You look at the NHL last season, Tampa Bay getting swept, Calgary getting swept, two of the powerhouses of the NHL league last year. So I think it's a lottery this far out saying they're going to win. They could lose form in the run into the playoffs and then be shaky, or they could, push too hard, secure their playoff slot and then have no energy left. It's all about a mindset, I think, more. I think, back to revenue sharing. To me, it's bizarre that in this day and age, in the 21st century, the pay divide between nations, I think that has to end. If that's going to help develop the game, you don't need to tinker with the international calendar. You just have to pay the players. The fact that the American Rugby Championship, which is their version of the Six Nations, is being played in August to allow Major League Rugby to be less affected in the US and Canada, says that leagues and World Rugby can come to some kind of agreement when internationals are played and when league seasons are played to avoid that clash where players are not available from club to country. So if you can have a positive dialogue, it shouldn't surprise me. I think the World Rugby should say revenue sharing 50-50 on the gates. So the smaller nations, be it on finances or player base or both, can actually compete long term and have a healthy sport long term. Otherwise, it just defeats the object of playing. The Manchester City being banned from European football, I've already done a video on that. It's on the channel. But I think we've been here with AC Milan. PSG, could they look at that again? A precedent was set with AC Milan. Manchester City don't have a leg to stand on, and it does affect qualification for Europe from the Premier League. So if they win the League Cup, does that mean Aston Villa qualify for Europa League? If they win the FA Cup, for example, if they make it that far, does the runner-up in that competition, if they beat someone, qualify for Champions League qualification places? As it currently stands, Man United would qualify for the Champions League, and Sheffield United would be the automatic Europa League qualifier, and I believe it's Tottenham would go into the Europa Champions League qualifying stages. It really complicates things in the Premier League when it comes to the fact that City cannot qualify for Europe. It means the teams behind them and the teams that they'll be playing in cup competitions basically will be eligible for qualification. So it does affect things on a footballing standpoint in that respect. Whether their appeal and their ban gets reduced, I don't know. They've been wholly negative about the whole process from day one. They've basically said it's a fit up, blah 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 blah. It's a stitch up. It wasn't a fair independent investigation. They were finding us guilty before the investigation. They're basically slagging off UEFA left, right, and centre. But they've only got themselves to blame in the sense that their sponsorship deal with Etihad Airways is the guy's brother. It's nepotism. They weren't very transparent on the sponsorship deal, and it's a 4-year period as well. It's not as if they broke the rules for a brief period. This is a sustained period of rule breakage. But UEFA have come out and stated that the financial fair play rules as they currently are, set up both across Europe and in domestic leagues is a flawed system. So these kinds of things will continue to happen. If anything comes out of this, it's they have to change the financial fair play system or bring in a salary cap or a spending cap. This is why I think that Neymar's record transfer doesn't get broken in real terms. It might get broken financially in the actual an extra couple of million more, but in real terms with inflation and things like that, I do not see Neymar's transfer record being broken by anyone. I cannot see that happening. I see that is the record transfer and that will stay, because as we've seen, the transfer markets have been more quiet since Neymar's transfer. Yeah, there have been a few record signings for positions like goalkeepers and defenders and bits and pieces like that and club records, but I don't think the overall transfer record gets broken. I think Neymar's transfer in real terms is the biggest transfer of all time. I think they've got to do something because fans are getting more and more frustrated, and the pushback from fans about ticket prices, lack of the TV deals, kickoff time has been changed. Midweek games, Friday nights, Monday night games. The fans are starting to push back. They are starting to push back, and the amount of empty seats at stadiums tell you that. The devaluation of the cup competitions, with the French League Cup being scrapped from next season, the debate about our current League Cup in England, the debate about the cup competitions in Scotland and across Europe, and the fact that other leagues have also shelved their League Cup. There's a reason for that. The Cup Winners' Cup by UEFA being scrapped 20 years ago. UEFA have sown the seeds for this 20 odd years ago, and the TV companies have also sown the seeds for this discontent amongst especially fans. And when you lose the fans, you have empty seats at stadiums for whatever reason, it doesn't look good for live TV. I mean, I've watched a lot of rugby league, Super League. Watched a lot of Super League games, a lot of empty seats, especially on the Friday night games. A lot of empty seats on the Friday night games. I love the Major League Rugby. I think it's a breath of fresh air. I mean, some of the stadiums are baseball stadiums that some of the teams are using, and some of the teams do use a 3G Astro pitch, which I'm not overly keen on. But there are some brand new facilities being built that are rugby specific. I think Houston and Austin, Colorado, Utah, and San Diego all have basically football, soccer, rugby stadiums. So they work for those kind of sports. Atlanta, one of the new teams, uses, I think it is actually a rugby pitch with football markings on it as well from the university they play at. Washington DC's team uses an American football pitch because they're basically at the moment using a university for their games. New Orleans, they've moved to an old baseball stadium because the team that was there, their lease was up. They were using a high school stadium to play their games before, and the pitch wasn't great at the stadium they were using before. I think it's going in the right direction. I think they've gone with smaller stadiums to start with. Seattle always sell out. Their stadium is packed. San Diego always sell out. New Orleans have good crowds, considering that New Orleans really isn't a rugby hotbed of America. Colorado have a good stadium and sell out. Both Texan teams generally draw pretty well. And Austin play in a stadium that's attached to the Circuit of the Americas. They already have a world-class facility with great transport links, and I do honestly believe that the team can turn around their shocking form, that they can draw fans. Is it Houston or Austin? I think it's Austin is the worst team in Major League Rugby. If they can turn around their form somewhat, then they can fill that beautiful stadium for what it is. It's a great facility. If I'm honest, the fact that the America's Rugby Championship, which is their version of the Six Nations that involves both North and South America, so the US, the Canadians, the Uruguayans, the Chileans, and the Brazilians, if they can get their internationals moved to the summer, so the new rugby competition in South America plus Major League Rugby, they don't have to lose their players and affect their squad depth, is a good thing. The fact that Rene Ranger, is going to play Major League Rugby, Matthew Bastareaud, Adam Ashley Cooper, they're getting some star players who could still get into the Wallabies or All Black sides, or even the French team. That tells you something about the quality of player they're attracting now to the US. I think, who's Mar Nonu? I mean, he could still be an All Black now, even though he's 37. He's a brilliant player. But rugby in Uruguay is the second, third sport after I think polo and football. They have a good club system in place already, amateur club system. It's well supported. They have a good rivalry with Argentina historically, although Argentina, obviously the bigger nation, has more funding, but it's going in the right direction. I do think, Rugby Europe, the European rugby nations, especially the second tier is okay. It's below the Georgia, the Romanias, the Russias, the Germanys. It's that third tier of European nation coming through where I think there is a problem. I think they could be asleep on the ball because some of their best a lot of young players at club level in Europe are going to North America, and this is where I see the Saracens salary cap scandal as a turning point, because they're going to play in the Championship next season. How many of those players end up going across the Atlantic to play in the US and Canada? Because that league is going to be expanding again next year, so there's going to be 2 more teams where they need to fill roster spots, and the younger players at Saracens will not be commanding such a salary cap hit as, let's say, Owen Farrell. Could a lot of these Saracens players be looking at the US until the whole situation dies down in Saracens, let's say, get promoted again. Yeah, that's if they don't ring fence the Premiership. It's an interesting one. I think we shall have to see what happens. But the growth over in the US and the crowd numbers, especially at some teams, are really really good. Oh yeah, I mean, look, there's some really good players from all over the world playing. We've got German internationals playing in Major League Rugby. We've got a lot of Uruguayans and Chileans and Brazilians. And yeah, the fact that European players as well and African players like Namibians and such are looking at North America to get paid tells you that Super Rugby is not in a good position because Namibians have played in Super Rugby. European rugby at that kind of continental level is not in a good position. There's only a few leagues that actually pay the money. Yeah, I can see the American rugby competitions really catching on, and they have big corporate sponsors. They have big money behind them, and we'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to it. I think the early stages of Major League Rugby are good, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens over the next couple of seasons. And I think the old guard of rugby have been asleep on the ball. I think Japan, Japan and Georgia and nations like that, they overlooked them for a long time, and now look what they're doing. So I think the old guard need to up their game. If rugby union is to really sell itself, North America is one of the best places to sell it. They love their contact sports. They love the NFL and the NHL over there. If they can sell Major League Rugby and not clash, they're not clashing with the NFL. They'll clash with the CFL, but not the NFL. And that's where you can get a lot of people in those markets to go, we haven't got any NFL to watch. CFL only really is Canada. And that's when the ice hockey's finished. That's when the CFL season's played. There's one Canadian team. They could have a team in Vancouver soon or Ottawa. So we'll see what happens there. So they've worked out really well. They're not clashing with the other major league sports apart from MLS. And Major League Soccer has exploded as well. Six Nations does nothing from Europe's tier 2 and tier 3. There's an idea being floated around that South Africa could make it the Seven Nations, which I think is complete and utter suicide. I know we have 2 Pro 14 teams from South Africa, but that's just taking the piss. But this is what happens when you have a private equity firm involved with the Six Nations in CVC. This is a money-making idea. I think the bigger problems are that while the Georgians are a really, really good tier 2 nation side, they've never beaten a tier 1 nation ever. And that's what's holding them back until they can beat a Scotland or an Italy, the weaker teams in the Six Nations as it currently is. If we have a promotion relegation system, the Italians will still beat them every time. And then it becomes a pointless exercise, an annual exercise of Scotland or Italy beating the crap out of Georgia because they've got more skilled backs, better coaching, better financing, and it's just going to be a repeat cycle. And the best Georgian players play in France, and a lot of them have actually played for France. So it's a catch-22. I think could rugby union go the same as football, have a European Euros tournament? It's a possibility, but then you've got to look at we'll see. Rugby in Britain is a mess. We've seen with the Saracen salary cap scandal that CVC. I'm not a big fan of the possibility of the Six Nations being taken off free-to-air TV. I think that could be really. We've seen what's happened with cricket. We've seen what's happened with rugby league. Crowd numbers dropping, and whoever came up with the 100 format at the ECB, were they on cocaine, acid, shrooms? Because everyone apart from the centrally contracted players is like, and the fans. Oh, it's attract new fans. Well, if you're killing off your existing fan base and pissing them off, it's not going to help anything. But I worry it's not just rugby in Britain. It's the sport as a whole is at a crossroads. Absolutely at a crossroads. No doubt in my mind. I have no doubt in my mind that the sport globally is at that crossroads. And I fear it could go the same way as football, where it becomes, for the fan at least, prohibitively expensive to go to games. That's a problem, especially when the lower levels of the league structures across Europe are struggling financially. If you make it prohibitively expensive to go to games, it causes problems. We're seeing it in football with teams going bust all the time. If you kill off the base of the building, the top level will fall down. You need a good, strong grassroots level. We're seeing it in rugby league. It's struggling. Crowds are not great. I don't know how long it can continue. Both codes. I really don't. But we'll have to see what happens, won't we? We'll have to see what happens with the Rugby League World Cup. What crowd numbers are like in 2021. That'll be interesting. That'll be a tale of the tape, so to speak. If crowd numbers are struggling in the Rugby League World Cup, we've got problems. We have got problems. And the 2013 Rugby League World Cup was brilliant. I felt the crowd numbers were good. Since then, something has happened in the last 7 years, because we've seen the two lowest Challenge Cup final attendances since the war. At the Catalan Cup final, a brilliant game to watch as a neutral. First time winners. Half the stadium's empty. Last year's Challenge Cup final, lots of empty seats. So, make of that what you will. Honest to God, make of that what you will. And I do fear that both codes of rugby have sold their soul. I do. I completely agree with you on that one. I think the way the TV rights for domestic club games at least have. I think the way to go forward with any sport is to have shared rights, like we have with the Champions League back in the day, where a proportion are on subscription TV and a proportion are on free to air. That's got to be the logical conclusion, because we've seen free to air coverage. If you have those games available, the viewing figures go through the roof. Absolutely through the roof. You put it behind a paywall, there you go. Basement level. And it's all about the money. And this is the problem. It's all about the money. I understand sport is a business, but when it's all about the money, you lose something a little bit. You lose something. You really do. And it's not a good outcome. But yeah, it doesn't matter that St Helens pushed the NRL team all the way. They've still lost. That's how many years in a row now? And the fact St Helens have got a stacked roster as well. And the Roosters have a lot of loss. And also, bear in mind, the NRL is still in pre-season. The Super League team should be winning that game. If you look at it, we're a month into the season. Players are up to speed. The NRL club, the Roosters, still in pre-season. And they've lost good key players from that lineup, and they still won with a pre-season lineup. That, for me, says all you need to know about where Super League is. I haven't seen the game, so I'm going to have to watch the game when I can. But the fact that the NRL team, yet again, wins the World Club Challenge, it doesn't matter that they were pushed all the way. They've still won with a weakened lineup, still in the pre-season. So, it is what it is. The Rugby Union losing in Australia, of course it is. AFL and Rugby League, way ahead. And I've done videos on this where Cooper Cronk, if you look at Cooper Cronk, he was a Rugby Union player. He's not the only one to turn his back on Union in his teenage years, at 17, 18, and go into league. Because the difference is the Rugby League, even at second reserve grade, will still pay you more than Union. The funding is there. The schools that are linked to Rugby League or AFL across the East Coast, from the state of Victoria through up to Queensland, at the north end of Queensland, the infrastructure is in place. The player base is there, the fan base is there, the money's there. Rugby Union's a joke in Australia. It's not just the Israel Folau situations is why they lost the World Cup. Didn't play well, and Michael Chaker's out of a job. It's a structural thing that goes back decades and decades and decades. It's been an issue for 20 odd years. The fact that Australia haven't won the World Cup since like 1999, yeah, they've been to a couple of finals since then, but they've been outclassed in both finals. Apart from, I think, 2003, I think 4 years ago, they were absolutely second best to the All Blacks. You look at their record against South Africans, Argentina, the European top-level nations, the All Black. It's just not there, and the fact that they haven't it's badly organised, it's badly funded. There's concerns about governance. They're bleeding players to the AFL and rugby league in Australia. Bleeding players. Some of their best players don't play in Australia; they play in Europe, and they're also looking at Major League Rugby. Some of their youth prospects, they're going, I'm turning my back on the club game here. I'm looking at North America. I'm looking at Europe. I'm going to get paid. The money isn't there. The domestic competition, the crowd numbers are absolutely appalling. Absolutely appalling. We've debated this to death for 2-3 years on the channel that rugby union in Australia is dying a death, and it will continue to do so. It will continue to do so. I have no doubt. These are good. It's been an ongoing issue for a long time. Long time. Also, when I was at school, we had Australian gap year students. Most of them were rugby league or Aussie rules fans. We only had a couple that were union fans that came out of Australia. If it was New Zealand or South Africa, that was a different story, or America, with the sports that they liked. But when you look at the numbers, like you ask them what do you like? Aussie rules, rugby league, cricket. They enjoyed those sports a lot more and played them at school. So yeah, there is an issue with Rugby Australia not reaching out to grassroots clubs, schools, colleges, universities. Problem. It's a grassroots problem. It is a massive problem. And losing Western Force from the Super Rugby, I think, is not a good image either. Not at all. But it's a governance thing, isn't it? It also doesn't help that rugby in Australia is seen more as an upper class sport than it is here in England. It's seen as a very upper class sport in Australia, which doesn't help when most Aussies are your grafting working class types. It's seen as a very elitist sport, and it has been for quite some time, like the old boys club. Whereas the NRL and the AFL, working class lads can get into that because every town or city, every suburb has an AFL affiliated club or an Aussie rules club and a rugby league club, even at grassroots level. They're everywhere. And rugby league is even played in Western Australia and the Northern Territory and South Australia. Maybe not at the highest level when it comes to reserve grade, but Perth, Adelaide, Darwin, they have rugby league clubs. AFL, like so Aussie rules, the state competitions, they're played across the country. Rugby union, I think the fact that Aussie rules and rugby league have grassroots clubs across, just across. There was. And then there was that meeting in Huddersfield in 1860, 1868, in that hotel. And the rest is history. And Aussie rules is a derivative of Gaelic football because of all the convicts go to Australia at the same time. So the Gaelic sports, which again are derivatives of association football and rugby, but it is what it is. We can discuss all the various codes and footballing sports. So North American football, so CFL, NFL, things like that. Gaelic football, hurling, all that. But you have to go back to that meeting in that hotel in Huddersfield in the 1860s, and that's where your history lies. The splitting of the codes. Don't get me wrong. Discussing rugby with Americans, they don't know the difference between league and union. You have to really give them a history lesson, and they're really confused. It's really funny because they'll just type in rugby hits or NRL hits or rugby union. They won't type in rugby union, rugby league. They'll just type in rugby hits, rugby tackles, and they get really confused with why is this one different to that one. It's because that's rugby league, mate. It's a different sport. It's just different sport. It's like CFL, NFL. You have to basically go to that base level of saying it's like the CFL, NFL, or it's basically the same sport with different rules. And they're like, "Oh, right." And then when you show them sevens and League Nines, they get even more confused. And then you have to really go, oh, okay. Okay. But they will get there. They will get there. But you have to look at how it's developing outside in new countries and how that domestically in Australia, it's a mess. How they've managed to win World Cups is absolutely beyond me. Absolutely beyond me. The player base is dropping for those playing the sport, and they are losing players to league and AFL. You just have to look at the amount of AFL and NRL players who at some point played rugby union at school and decided to turn their back on it, and some of it is to do with getting paid. Even if you're a part-time league or AFL player at reserve grade or regional grade, you're still getting paid. Far better than rugby union. Shoot Shield. The Shoot Shield is an absolute farce. I've seen some rugby union games on YouTube. My God, the crowd numbers are it's like 4 men and the dog. It really is bad. It's like watching Sunday League football. It's not a great amount of people turning up to watch the local lads play against the next town down. It's really not great. It is worrying for the long term future of the sport down under. No, they're not free to. I don't actually have a TV license, and I don't have my TV plugged into the satellite dish at my block of flats. But I'm moving in like a few weeks back to my family house because this flat I've been evicted basically. So because the flat's not suitable because all my plumbing's failed, all my heating's failed. So I'm moving again in a few weeks, which is actually a blessing in disguise. It means I can actually watch more of the Euro 2020 tournament. It means I can watch more of just sport in general, really, because I'll have my telly connected, I'll have my internet connected, and I'll have my laptop, so I can watch a whole lot more sport in a couple of weeks, which is great. Means I can catch some of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I can sort out my NRL subscription, so I can watch all the NRL games this season, which will be really nice. Again, cricket in the UK, all subscription TV. All of it. I'm not going to be watching the 100. I'm not going to be wasting my time on that format. And what I find really interesting is they've stopped advertising on Facebook and Twitter now, trying to ram it down our throats. I think they've got the hint that they're not winning the battle of social media. They're not winning the fans over. And the way they're marketing for new fans, it's not great. They haven't really advertised it very well. And existing cricket fans are just turned against it completely. They want, if anything, Test cricket back on free TV, free to air. Well, TV license is basic hidden tax, and I refuse to pay it. But free to air TV, 1 days, even if it's county level, T20, doesn't matter whatever it is. They want standardised cricket back on the TV. They don't want the new format. They want the existing formats on the telly, free to air. It doesn't matter if it's the IPL, which we used to have on free to air TV. I really don't know. I mean, if you look at the sponsor, it's a fast food company. And it just looks like packs of potato chips playing each other and chocolate bars. It's just roasted nuts. It's just they've chosen the wrong sponsor. They've fiddled with the format to come up with a crack. It's like they were smoking crack or doing meth when they came up with this idea. It's like a media executive goes, "Oh, how?" It's like an advertising executive was the one who planned this idea, rather than actual cricketing people going, "Is this a good idea?" This isn't schoolyard rules where like they're trying to get kids to play the game in school. This is like we're trying to get professional athletes to play this experimental format. Yet, and it's designed to get people into the sport. When okay, they're going to become fans of cricket, right? So when they actually watch a Test match or a T20, they're like, "Why are the rules different?" It's because it's 6 balls and over, not 18 ball over. It's an actual. This is how you play. And I do believe there are tweaks you can make to the existing cricketing rulebook when it comes to super overs and the power plays in T20 and international 1 days. Get rid of them. Just treat it as Test cricket, just a shorter format of it. That's my view on that. Test cricket, I think day-night test is the way to go. But there's resistance from the old Blazers, yet they've come up with this idea. I have no idea what the thinking is at the ECB, but it's a very muddled thinking, and it's pissing off the fans. When you lose fans, stadiums, cricket grounds with no fans in, it basically means it's a hobby being played by enthusiasts rather than a sport being played by professionals. And if we continue to see county games lose fans, and the county system in England and Wales, because Glamorgan, lose grassroots fans, hardcore fans turning their back on the sport, then that's not a sport. It's a hobby played by enthusiasts. It's lost its way. And part of the problem is the TV deal that's been in place for 15 years is a joke, and viewing figures are well down. And those who were trying to, but did you see the Cricket World Cup final? Yeah, because it was on free-to-air TV. That's why I watched it. I'm not paying Sky. The highlights package was non-existent. So the ECB have really got to think about, okay, so we need to get domestic cricket at least. I don't care if it's T20s or one days. We need to get something on the TV free-to-air, because this is getting farcical now with how it's done. Oh God. Can rugby afford the number of county teams it has? Well, that's youth level mostly. Cricket really can't, because the TV deal was shocking. But rugby, the amount of registered players. I mean, I used to play amateur level. Nearly got to the semi-pro ranks 9 years ago. Rugby union has got a good grassroots player base. It's just the money side. Rugby league is an absolute mess when it comes to the lower levels, which is affecting the Super League and the Championship in this country. I mean, the London Scholars are giving a free tryout day today in London. I was tempted to go down and have a tryout with the Scholars today. I'm not joking. I'm not in the best of shape, but I was tempted to have a little bit of exercise for an hour. The fact that a semi-pro rugby team in London, doesn't matter what code, is going, we're having open tryouts today. Just turn up, whatever you're wearing. That tells me that rugby league is in serious trouble. It doesn't matter that it's a team outside the traditional area. When a semi-pro to pro rugby team are going, we're having open tryouts for anyone of any ability to get it into our squad, tells you that things are not great in rugby league. Really not great. And cricket's in the same position. It's nowhere near where it should be. And the TV deal has got a lot to do with that. A lot to do with it. The TV deal hasn't benefited cricket, as what the ECB claim. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the criticism daily on social media from fans. If the ECB aren't looking at their social media accounts, then who's ever in charge of them deserves to be sacked. And whoever's in charge of grassroots development and organising below the top two tiers of county cricket, so that third tier where those that don't have the promotion relegation county cricket, those that can't quite afford to go to that next level, like Berkshire and Oxfordshire and counties like that, basically the area I live in, and Buckinghamshire. That tells you something about the state of the game across the board, and where the money is or isn't. I don't know if we have to change the format and do away with the county system and make it city system like they do in Australia. Traditionalists will hate that, but that could be the way to go to salvage the domestic game in this country. But I don't know. Cricket is a conundrum because of the amount of formats now and centralised contracts and TV deals. It is a sport that is again it's been at a crossroads for a while, and I don't think it's going in the right direction. I think we have to seriously look at how the sport is governed and run and all that goes with that. All that goes with that, but we'll see what happens. I think that the money isn't there, and part of that's to do with the TV deal. The money hasn't gone down to grassroots level. It's gone into centralised contracts and funding the test side and the T20 and the one day side and centralised contracts, and it's not reaching where it should reach, and that is a problem. And the media coverage is just, I think fans have reached a point now where they're not happy with the ECB, and we could see big problems going forward. But it is what it is, and at the moment, that's where we stand. I've seen a lot of Australian sport. Bar TV Sports is a YouTube channel that covers rugby league, rugby union, cricket, all that. at the grassroots level, well, cricket in Australia is like a religion, though, isn't it? I mean, it's far better followed and supported by local cricket clubs and local fans, and it. There's a reason why Australia are, well, historically better than England in the Ashes and historically better in the Test rankings. Okay, recent times with the ball tampering scandal and other issues with the Australian setup is another thing, but there's a reason why Australia is a cricket mad country that continues to support its national side and continues to have a pretty healthy domestic competition, and the fact that it's more accessible, it seems, to not just an Australian audience but a global audience. Tells you what you need to know. And the fact, look at New Zealand, a far smaller country in population, with far less registered players for percentage of population. Considering that cricket is not the most popular sport, it's both kinds of rugby. And look what they're doing. Says if you have a positive outlook with a good grassroots participation and good grassroots funding and a more accessible sport when it comes to the media rights, you get more people playing and watching, and then as a result, you have a better team and a better rapport with the fans that watch said team. And there you go. It's not hard. It really isn't hard. It's quite simple, really. You make it accessible. You invest in the grassroots. Oh, that's my phone. Oh, what's that? Oh, we have lots of updates. Oh, it's my mate's birthday. Excellent. But yeah, you think of it that way. Just think of it that way. Oh, look, geo-block. I've had that with so many things. It's to do with the multinational media companies. I hate geo-block. It does my nutting. It really frustrates me intensely. I've had it with the NASCAR, which is actually where they screwed up their live stream. But when you want to watch the Daytona 500, they geo-blocked it. And I'm like, well, every other NASCAR race for the last 5 years on YouTube has been accessible. I love my motorsport. Why are you geo-blocking? And I sent them a message on email. So why are you geo-blocking me? And suddenly, all the races from this last weekend, I can watch them all. Or why did you geo-block the Daytona weekend? I have no idea. It's your biggest event on your calendar, yet you're geo-blocking everyone from outside the US and Canada. I do not understand your logic. Really. Because the NASCAR games, actually, video games, sell quite well out of the US, actually, outside the US. We have arcade games. We have Forza. It's the NASCAR actually sells quite well outside the US. I have no idea why they're geo-block. I hate geo-block. I hate that kind of blackout. We have it far too often. It's frustrating, and it's to do with who has the media rights and who has the copyright. It's so frustrating. It actually harms rather than helps the sport. It is a 1950s mindset, and I don't think it actually. Sport's global now. You cannot get away with it really because it just fans will find VPNs. The technology's moved on. And this is where the sport with the old Blazers in charge and the old guard in charge hasn't quite adapted to the modern sports fan. So I do not understand it because the modern sports fan. I mean, you look at in the Asian countries, they absorb and watch so much European and North American sport. It is unreal. If you were to geo-block them, you're missing out on billions of potential viewers. Even in India, which is a cricket and field hockey mad country, they will watch Premier League football. They will watch rugby league, rugby union, motorsport. They will watch anything in India. They are massive consumers of Western sport. Massive. Even if they don't play those sports, they are massive consumers of those sports. You geo-block India, let's say cricket, you geo-block India when it comes to cricket or field hockey broadcasts, you've just lost 1 billion potential viewers, which is insane. Absolutely insane. So the people in charge of sport, they are the old suits and ties, they are the old crusts, as I call them, the old Blazers, the old boys club, and sometimes old girls club, depending if it's like netball or something like that. They need to go. They need to have a more outward looking idea, because geo-blocking is 1950s mindset. It's like with the rugby league RFL last year, forcing the non-English teams to pay for entry. Really backfired on them. So this year, Toronto don't have to pay for entry. They're allowed in. Catalan don't have to pay for entry. They're allowed in. Toulouse do not have to pay for entry. Allowed in. Because the reaction they got from fans, not just Super League fans who wanted to watch Catalan and Toulouse and Toronto, see what they could do, but from rugby league fans across the world was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's the Challenge Cup. You cannot prevent a side from signing up for it. the reaction from rugby league fans globally, the backlash on social media, they haven't done it this year. Partly because the RFL's losing money, and the Lions tour to New Zealand, Tonga, and Papua New Guinea was a farce. That's where all the money went. Yeah, they can't do that. So there you go. And the fact I'm going to have to do a video on Wayne Bennett and how long he will be a rugby league coach, because his Lions tour and the fact that he's now no longer England or Great Britain coach tells you a lot. He's just South Sydney coach now. How many more years has he got left as a top level rugby league coach? Because that's a debating point, and the selection policies and the development of players, the fact that so many of the GB players were technically Australians and Kiwis, basically, and had tenuous links with the UK was really a sham. There are some really talented young players right now playing rugby league in the Super League and NRL who are British, who could have been, and they had a tenuous link. And this is the international selection rules in rugby league are an absolute farce. They make rugby union look pretty decent when it comes to you've been resident for a few years, you can play for us now, which is basically where the Italians, the French get a lot of their players from. Oh yeah, look, I Vimeo, I haven't really used it. I know it's there. The fact that you can find free and accessible sport, even the minor sports like croquet. I know you're a croquet fan. It's a good thing. I think global sport needs to realise you can still get the ad revenue from that, because the broadcast may be sponsored, and YouTube you get ads, the little ad banners, so you can still make money. This is what it's bizarre to me why these sports leagues are so resistant to allowing a global audience outside of the locale to watch and have, because YouTube can geo-block as well. Like the World Championship Ice Hockey, I couldn't watch the GB games on YouTube because we have free sports covering the as a broadcaster. So when the UK played Canada, I managed to watch the game live at my friend's house. But when I wanted to watch the game again, I missed a few bits of the game on YouTube, it was geo-blocked. And when I missed a couple of the GB games because they weren't on, they were geo-blocked. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. I could just change my location to the US and I could have watched it all. I could have watched the whole tournament by constantly changing my location on YouTube on my settings every video. But that's just a pain in the ass. But they geo-blocked it. And I'm just like, if you're trying to grow the sport, surely you should allow people to watch this. It doesn't matter if they're in Britain or Norway or wherever it is. And they were like, no, we're geo-blocking. I'm just like, well, not everyone has satellite TV. So you've just undermined the growth the sport has had in the last decade. Well done, broadcaster. And that was down to IHF and the various domestic broadcasters doing it. I think it is a backwards policy. Oh yeah, look, I watch the Major League Rugby and I watch the America's Rugby Championship as well. That is on World Rugby and that is live on YouTube. The America's Championship Rugby. Go on the World Rugby YouTube page, subscribe to it. The tournament kicks off in August. I suggest you watch it because it is on freely accessible. And okay, sometimes the commentary is in crazy Spanish. I will admit I have watched the occasional American Rugby Championship with the commentary in Spanish. It's hilarious with the Brazilian or Uruguayan commentators in Portuguese or Spanish. It is really, really funny, especially when they get really hyped up when a boring piece of play happens. I sometimes like watching sports with the foreign language broadcast. It makes it kind of a bit more what's going on. But no, you can. World Rugby always has freely accessible stuff on YouTube. Be it Sevens, America's Championship Rugby, World Cup qualification games. When we had the qualification for Hong Kong and Germany when they couldn't quite make it to the World Cup. It was great fun in the last couple of years watching a lot of rugby on the World Rugby YouTube page, especially with the foreign language broadcasts. Oh, it's hilarious when you have the Spanish or Portuguese or French commentary. Well, the French, not so much. I mean, I watched a fair few games with the French commentary from on YouTube or on a few other websites. French is not the best sport for commentary, but when it comes to Latin language like Italian or Spanish or Portuguese, oh my god, it's hilarious, absolutely hilarious. I'm not a big fan of Sevens. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not the biggest fan of Sevens. I have played it, but to watch the game's too short, and the score lines can get stupid really quick because it's so open. There's only 7 players a side. So that's why I prefer the 15-a-side Union game. when it comes to league, again, I prefer watching 13-a-side than nines, but I will watch. It's not my preferred format of either sport, but I will watch happily. Sevens is a great way for new fans and kids to get into the rugby union, and nines is a great way for, again, kids and new fans to get into league. I completely understand why those formats exist. They're great ways to get new fans hooked, and then you can develop their fandom with the mainstream club and international. I do watch Scrum 5 occasionally with Welsh commentary, just because I like watching rugby. The fact that, unfortunately, I mean, you can choose, you can have it in English or Welsh. I have watched the Women's Six Nations. I think I watched a Wales, was it Wales Island a couple of years ago, Women's Six Nations in Welsh language. And you could choose to Irish Gaelic as well. That was great fun because I know a few words. Joys of heritage, eh? But it's the passion that they have, and it's something that sometimes you don't get with a regular English language broadcast. Sometimes, especially on the American broadcasts, they really, when it comes to rugby, they don't quite get it right. But when it comes to like ice hockey or NFL, they go nuts. But when it comes to the play-by-play or the colour commentator in rugby, it can be a bit stale. So to watch it with Spanish commentary is really good fun because they just are passionate about it. And if you watch Italian football, for example, in Italian commentary, which I've done a lot of in my time, I watched a lot of Italian football over my 30 years of life. For 27 years of watching sport, I've watched a lot of Italian football with Italian commentary. Oh my God, it is a thing to behold, listening to the Italian commentator go bananas about a back pass. It's just something you don't get in necessarily British or English speaking broadcasts, where it can be a bit monotone, it can be a little bit lacking excitement. And some of the commentators we have, especially in British, when it's a British broadcaster, say Euros or Glenn Hoddle, I know he's a footballing brain, but as a commentator, he's not the best as the colour commentator. He's not the best. No, I like South African commentary. I think it's that deep voice. I've got a lot of South African friends, so when you have a South African commentator when it comes to rugby, I don't know what it is. I find South African commentary because you can hear it in Afrikaans, you can hear it in English, Zulu, Shona. I've got a lot of South African mates, so my friend Christian, when he was still alive, he passed away 4 years ago now, but we used to watch the Super Rugby on Sky, and I would try and find a broadcast on the internet, and he would make me watch in Afrikaans. I like watching with foreign language broadcasts. I don't understand everything they're talking about, but it's a great way to actually learn a language, is listen to it. And I picked up a fair bit of Afrikaans. I'm not going to bore you with my shocking pronunciations and butchery of words, but no, I was tempted to take up learning Afrikaans at night school 5-6 years ago. Really weird, but no, we'd try and find the Super Sport broadcasts, and then we would fiddle around and try and find an Afrikaans or a Shona or a Zulu broadcast. It's great fun because it gives you a different idea of how a certain community or a certain culture processes their sport and the excitement they get from it. Don't get me wrong, there are some English commentators or English speaking commentators who really go nuts. I like watching the Super Rugby because you have the New Zealanders, you have the South Africans, the Australians, the Argentinians now, the Japanese. And when you have someone who speaks both languages and you can pick up their accent, you can hear the passion in their voice. Or the Japanese commentators are hilarious when it comes to, they go nuts. The Oriental commentators go absolutely bananas. When you have a Japanese broadcast, I can remember when I was a kid, at the Nagano Winter Olympics, the feed screwed up and they actually got Japanese commentary for about half an hour. It was really fun. Partly because my uncle was married a Japanese woman, so I actually got a free translation from my aunt, which was absolutely hilarious because her English is not bad, but there are certain words she screws up, and she's been living here for 30 years and she still screws up basic phrases. And it's really funny because she's got a funny laugh. But foreign language commentary is so fun because you hear the passion that these people have for their chosen team. Afrikaans is basically a derivative of Dutch with a bit of French and German in it, and we have Germanic French words in the English language as well. It's that region of Europe. And there is a connection. There's a lot of Dutch words that do actually sound English, ironically. And Afrikaans is a blend of English, Dutch, French, and German. It's an interesting language, an interesting culture. The history of Southern Africa and the white settlers, be it English or Dutch, and a few Germans in Namibia. It's very interesting with the back and forth. There's French Huguenots went to Southern Africa as well. So there's a real interesting mix, and that's how the language develops from the settlers. But listening to a South African commentator with an Afrikaans heritage, with an English broadcast, you hear the real thick accent, and some of the phrases, you can see the cultural. And I love that about sport. It's a global thing. It's a leveler. Your background should not matter. Unfortunately, we have seen with some scandals that apparently background does matter, be it where you're from, the color of your skin, your religion, your views, Israel Folau. And unfortunately, that does still matter, and that's a problem. Sport is a symptom. Sport shows the symptoms of a society and the issues of a society. Sport is a representation of the society you live in. And I think what we saw with South Africa winning the Rugby World Cup, and how what there was and how that gives the country hope with a captain who is of native heritage, the best player, Faf de Klerk. I'm sorry, it's Kolosi and Faf de Klerk, and then you have Chelson Kolbe of mixed race. It's just, you look at it and you go, that is the byproduct of modern South Africa. What they were saying in their press conferences afterwards gives me hope. As someone who has a lot of African friends from Southern Africa, from Zimbabwe, Namibia, and South Africa, of the various backgrounds, it gives me hope. Something that part of the world has not had a lot of over the last 30, 40 years. It gives me hope. And I think, sport can be a good thing. So the South Africans winning the Rugby World Cup, it's a good thing. Japan hosting the World Cup and doing very well, good thing. The negative sides, the Israel Folau situation and the divisiveness about that, racism in football, incidents with Colin Kaepernick in the NFL. There is still a long way to go in so-called more developed societies. That is a concern for me, but the fact that politicians are getting involved in these things, it's not. It is what it is. And yes, you have three players from three major backgrounds in South Africa. Apart from the Asian, Hashim Amla with South African cricket as well. It shows that sport in South Africa is the equaliser. The politicians have failed. It's time for the sportsmen to step up. And I think what the Proteas in cricket, the Springbok in rugby union, and to a certain extent, football. There are some white players. The fact that there's not as many high-profile white players in South African football is a shame, but it's mostly a working-class sport, and most of the working class are black South Africans. But it just tells me something, that you have three or four because you've got the English South Africans and the Afrikaans, Boer South Africans. Faf de Klerk is just an icon. He's possibly the best scrum half in the world. Percy Montgomery was the best fullback in the world 12 years ago when they won previously. So he's from a British background, born in Namibia, which was the German-speaking part of South Africa for a long time until it got independence. Some of the greatest South African heroes, Chester Williams, mixed race, sadly passed away. Sport in South Africa is the equaliser. The issue is the politicians have failed. The sportsmen haven't. It's the politicians. And we can debate that to death. But the South African winning the Rugby World Cup is a good thing. But I think it's a good thing. There'll be those that disagree and think another nation should have won, and that's fair enough. But they were the best team in the tournament. They worked their way through, and they won. And when I said about the New Zealand South Africa group stage, saying South Africa showed a way to beat New Zealand even though they lost, I got slated for that. That video has aged quite well. That's one of the few videos on my channel I think has aged very, very well. But again, croquet is a very, very niche sport. I'm not gonna lie, I have played it at school, but it's a very, very niche sport. It's not necessarily the best sport for live television, but the fact that there are people out there, such as yourself, who know so much about it, says to me that there is a market there. If you get it right with the right kind of media deal, be it on social media or through a minor website, a streaming service, you could sell it. I wouldn't say croquet is the most necessary, the most interesting thing, but the fact that someone from a country like South Africa, where it's rugby or cricket or football not so much, but rugby or cricket, and they are religions. Someone being the world's best in such a niche sport outside the Olympic sports tells you something that, there is clearly some very, very good players out there in that particular field. And I'm going to have to look at croquet and why I mean, there's a world championship in croquet. I didn't know that until I started up this channel, but it is a very niche sport. But it's there. It's like curling. Apart from the Canadians and the Scandinavians and, well, Northern England and Scotland, not a lot of people are involved in curling. It's a Scandinavian, North British, Canadian sport. Yet they go nuts for it. And it is what it is. I mean, people go absolutely bananas for curling in Scandinavia, Canada, and Scotland, and certain parts of North England as well. There's a few curling clubs in the north of England. They go absolutely bananas for it. Outside of those locations, no one really cares. But in Canada, it gets national coverage. TSN and Sportsnet show the curling world championships and the domestic league club competition. They show it. So, I've got so many South African friends and friends from Zimbabwe and Namibia. I mean, it's just not South Africa; it's the southern end and Botswana. I've got friends, who say, the politicians have failed and divided us, and it's up to our sports stars to unite us. And that is very Namibia, not so much. Namibia is and Botswana, not so much. They seem more united as countries. They are poor, but they're more united as countries. But South Africa and Zimbabwe are so divided when the resources they have and the legacy of imperialism, which is not necessarily a good thing, but the infrastructure they have in these countries. Namibia is not actually as poverty stricken as the world media would have you believe. Small population, clustered around a few locations where it's viable to live in a country that's basically desert, but is very resource rich, and has some sheltered harbours like Walvis Bay on the southern African coast, on the Atlantic coast, where cargo ships can safely port in store. Botswana, again, very resource rich, great place for tourism, not overly wealthy. AIDS has been a big issue for Botswana, but again, pretty stable country. Zimbabwe, look at what Mugabe did there, and South Africa, complete and utter mess for the last 20 years, and that's the problem. That is the big issue, massive issue, is the sports stars are stepping in where the politicians have failed. And it shouldn't be the case with countries like South Africa and Zimbabwe, the resources they have and the infrastructure put in place by the colonial governments before independence. So it's bizarre to me that we have ended up in this position. And they were given home rule as well. And that's, I think, another issue is before they became independent in the 20th century, they were given dominion status and home rule, and they screwed it up. South African sports stars are impressive people. It doesn't matter what background they come from. It doesn't matter what community. It doesn't matter what sport. De Koss, the swimmer, not from a wealthy white family. People think, he's white, he must be a wealthy South African. No, not at all. You have to see the facilities he trained in South Africa. Community pools, not university, community pools. De Koss, the South African swimmer, very humble background. White farming stock, very humble background. Not wealthy white farmers either. And you have to look at Kolosi. Sachin Willemse from the 90s, early 2000s, he was involved in street gangs, ended up in hospital, and his local rugby club reached out to him, and he started playing after being stabbed at the age of 14, became a Springbok. That's over 15, 20 years ago. You have to look at William Booth, a white South African football player, married to Zulu woman, mixed race child. He was a poster boy of the 2009 Confederations Cup football going into the World Cup. So there are a lot of South African boxers. They just aren't at the same level because it's not as popular a sport in South Africa compared to rugby union, and cricket and football. It ranks very low because it's individualistic sport, and South Africans aren't really big South Africa's team sport really as a country, whereas other countries they will really have good individualistic sport programs like tennis and golf, boxing, martial arts. South Africa, much like Australia as well, it's more team sport, whereas other countries like the UK have a good history with individualistic players such as snooker and tennis and golf, and because it's also you've got to look at, are there the boxing clubs there? Is the infrastructure there? Is there the fan base really there? That's something you have to look at, and you have to look at the sporting culture of a country. Mexico, they love their boxing, they love their wrestling, they have a big boxing history in Mexico. Whereas you look at places like Argentina, polo is the national sport. Polo, followed by football, followed by rugby union. You go to Brazil, it's football as the main sport. You go to, I don't know, Georgia in the Caucasus, it's actually wrestling, followed by rugby union, followed by football. So sport and culture has a lot to do with whether you have lots of team sports or individualistic sports. Alpine countries, they tend to have more smaller team sports or individual sports such as skiing, snowboarding, ice skating, speed. So there is a sporting culture and also a geographical thing to do with it as well, and infrastructure. Sporting infrastructure is crucial in any sports development, and if you do not have boxing clubs or a history of it and a popularity of it, you sometimes you need that one or two superstars in that sport who a nation can get behind. And I don't think South Africa has that. They have some good boxers. They've developed some good boxers over the time, but it's not a very popular sport because you've got to, it costs money to buy your equipment, to rent the gym space, hire a boxing trainer, and it's something that it's not in South African sporting culture. It's a team dynamic. It's the team goes out and plays. So the Springboks, the Proteas, they go out and they play the team sport because resources, finances. If you pull your resources together, you can get a team. One guy having to pay for a trainer, a nutritionist, all that. This is where DeCoste, the swimmer, really struggled. It's not really seen as viable. There are you got a couple of tennis players who are South African, but in reality, it's more team sport because you can pool your resources. Everyone can chip in and level the cost out rather than one individual with a small backroom team trying to fight the world. It just doesn't happen as much, and it's also to do with education. You look at the public school system or the university system in South Africa. It's team sports, team sports, team sports, team sports, and that's the culture they have. Is there's Ernie Els, the golfer. Okay, yes. There's one or two exceptions when it comes to certain sports, but in reality, certain countries focus more on the team sport. Other countries focus more on individual sports. And yes, Africa, they do have their golfers. I will admit, South Africa and golf is a thing, but again, it's to do with their education system. And some of the big colleges and universities do have golf courses and golf programs. And a lot of the best golfers go to the US where they have golf programs as well. And that's something else, is the education system when it links into sport. This is why rugby union in Australia is stuffed, because not enough of the big schools at state school level, so we're talking publicly funded schools, have rugby union as a PE. It's league, AFL. It's not rugby union. That's the private schools, which is where, again, the elitist side of things comes from. Whereas you look at other countries, we have a basketball program, we have an American football program. In some parts of the US, they have an ice hockey program. We have a soccer program, a football program, and the universities will have multiple sports programs. If you look at 5 Points Vids, he critiques all the various sporting stadiums in the major US Canadian leagues. And when he looks at the collegiate system, and let's say American football or baseball or soccer, he will look at the sports complex this university has for tennis, gymnastics, swimming, and they're really pumping a lot of money into the collegiate system in the US and to a certain extent Canada. Same as Africa, same I think in New Zealand. There's a big thing where sport is seen as the thing. So a school will make focus on rugby union, rugby league, cricket, soccer. They may have a specific sport they're very, very good at, but they will have a sports program. The fact that there's more horse equestrian programs tells you something. And the Australians actually have a very good record in the equestrian Olympic events. They do have some very good riders. You've got the Melbourne Cup horse race as well. That tells you something but bearing in mind, a lot of Australia is very, very rural, a lot of rural communities, and cowboys. That is, there's a reason why they have riding programs. Is you're in the saddle, herding cattle and sheep. It's the agricultural community, and it makes logical sense to train those skills for the work environment. You look at the cattle ranches and the sheep herding. It's the sheep industry, the wool industry, the cattle, the beef and dairy industry in Australia, massive. So there's a reason why that sport or equestrian sports are really well funded. It's because there's a need. If you don't make the sports grade, there's a need for people who can work with horses because of the agricultural communities in Australia. It's a logical thing. It's a logical explanation. There's a reason. Look, there's loads of niche sports and crazy stuff out there. But it's also, as I say, community. What if this sport can link into a work-based environment? We might as well train those skills. If you don't make it as a sports star in equestrianism or being outdoors kind of thing, you can translate the skills and the physicality you've learned at school into the workplace. This is why I think Australia do very well in the eventing competitions at the Olympics and at Badminton horse trials. Riding wise, is because of the rural community. Shooting as well. The Australians are very good at spot shooting and target shooting. Again, the rural communities. It's a logical thing. Tree chopping, yeah. The Canadians are quite good at that, ironically, and some people from Wisconsin in the US and Minnesota in the US. But again, if you can make that into a sport, that's great. But also, it's a job, and you can translate those skills over. This is where I think rugby union is failing somewhat in Australia. The money isn't there, and they are losing talented rugby players to the other sporting codes, or they give up the sport and just don't play it after a certain age. There isn't the funding for grassroots, and that's the problem. And that comes down to Rugby Australia's governance and where the money goes. This is where they should not have paid Israel Folau all that money. They should have pumped that money for his contract into grassroots, into Western Force. They failed to do that, and they're now, reaping the lack of benefits of not investing in grassroots. The amount of money they put on the line. Oh yeah, the Monty Python in Suspenders and a Bra. Yeah, I love Monty Python. Don't get me started on that. But the issue with Rugby Union Australia is Cricket Rugby Australia itself. The amount of money they lost with the Israel Folau saga, with the lawsuit and his big contract to begin with, could have gone into grassroots clubs, could have gone into developing the game with joining up with state schools, not private schools, the state sector in the education system to get it on the curriculum at PE, make it less elitist. And instead, they put all their eggs in one basket with Israel Folau. The Western Force weren't happy with that. They're still going as a concern, but they're not in Super Rugby. The ongoing legal issues and legal litigation between Israel Folau and Rugby Australia has cost them money. Would that be money better spent investing in Western Force and investing in grassroots across the country, or they put it in one player who ends up giving them the middle finger? So you've got to look at Rugby Australia's governance and where the money's going. And then you've got to look at the ECB and cricket in England and where the money's going. They're putting it in the 100. They're not putting it into grassroots. They're putting it into a crazy new format which no one wants. So the people signing off the checks are the ones who should be responsible. And it's the same with ice hockey in the US and Canada. It's a very prohibitively expensive sport. The NHL and the IIHF could do more to pump money in to help support youth hockey and all that, because the sport is is growing in some parts of the world and is actually contracting in some Canadian areas. It's contracting because it's so expensive to get your kids, equipment. And even as a beer league player, a friend of mine plays rec league here in the UK, ice hockey. His equipment costs him a fortune. If I look at how much his equipment costs, that's nearly a month's wages that he has to pay out on his sticks, gloves, skates, pads, helmet, kit. It's quite a lot of money. And the governing bodies or the wealthier leagues could do a lot more to pump money in. And it's a governance thing. It's who's signing off these checks, who's really, what's the direction of the sport in a location. Oh yeah, I've seen a lot of adverts for sports injury insurance, partly because obviously looking at my search history, I watch a lot of sport. If you look at, this is how cookies work. I love that, tracking cookies. What a way to call a thing. So just add tracking. It's easier. I've seen a lot of adverts on my social media aimed at sports insurance because of the amount of sport that I consume as a fan, and the amount of sports pages I'm looking at. And I'm looking at the NHL, I'm looking at the NBA, I'm looking at rugby union, I'm looking at rugby league, I'm looking at AFL. Contact sports insurance. And as an ex-player, I could have actually done with some sports insurance because me shoulder, me back, me ankle are pretty wrecked. I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna need to have some medical procedures done to repair my shoulder. I may need multiple operations. It could just be managing it with physio and physiotherapy and aquatherapy, but I most likely need a shoulder operation. And it's going to be a very invasive procedure, which means I'm going to be off work for a very long time. And that's going to cost me financially. And that's something that I'm very concerned about. And sports insurance, yes, is a big thing. And player welfare is a big thing. This is a question I wasn't expecting, actually. But I have a big vested interest in. We're seeing so many players post-retirement struggle financially, in team sports especially, but also in individual sports as well. Oh God, yeah. If they recommend that I need surgery, yes, I could go privately, but it will cost me a fortune. I'll get better care privately as well, but no, I have been to physio on the NHS multiple over the last 4 years, and we're talking I've spent 6 to 9 months as a NHS outpatient for my shoulder, especially my shoulder and my neck. I've also gone in with my ankle as well. And my other shoulder. So I've had a lot of over the last 4 years, I've spent about 9 months as an NHS outpatient just on my physical injuries. That's not to do with the other side effects, such as the mental side of things, which has also taken up a good 6 months. So basically, I've lost like a year and a half of work with my health issues. Mostly to do with my shoulder, my neck, and my back. They are not in good shape, and that is to do with sport. Absolutely, from school to being an adult as an amateur rugby player, that is to do with sport. I have no doubt on where those injuries have come from. And then I aggravated them more with road traffic accidents. So I have, yes, I wish I had sports insurance, but you have to look at the cost. And at the time, I wasn't earning a lot of money, and that is a lot of money to spend out monthly or quarterly on a insurance premium. And this is why a lot of people decide not to do it. It is very expensive. It does add up. It may not seem like much at the time, but your premiums go up and up and up. And when you do actually have to have a payout, it really screws you long term. You can just get normal health insurance, and you can say, "Look, I do play amateur sport," but then that affects your health insurance massively. If you have specifically tailored sports insurance, which I wish I had, but at the time I was a student and I wasn't working. And yeah, it's the thing. It happened with my dad. They said no more football and rugby for you, but he was already in his 30s at that point, and he was like, "Well, I'm now the sergeant major of the battalion. I think I'm going to do more shouting at squaddies than actually playing rugby union, rugby league, and football." And he was very, very good as well. But yeah, no. Sports insurance for amateur and semi-pro players, even professionals, it's recommended you get it, and not all the professionals have it either, which is a real surprising thing. I'm not surprised it's not compulsory, but no, especially for the grassroots level, yeah, I would recommend it. But you have to weigh up, okay, what are my earnings? How much am I earning? Is it viable for me to pay this out? And this is where a lot of people just give up playing, who could be scouted by higher leagues, so to speak, or scouted professionally. A lot of them give up because the cost of participating. This is another reason why I could have gone back to play again, but the cost became prohibitive, and I was just like, I'm paying to play rather than getting paid to play. I'm losing money playing. I was enjoying playing, but I'm losing money playing, and it got to the point where I had to go. Even though I was fit to play again and working again, I was like, nah, I'm gonna knock it on the head. I'm gonna decide to knock it on the head, and I wish I hadn't, but at the same time, I'm glad I have, because yeah, health wise, I could have gone to the London Scholars Tryout today, but I would have just probably done my shoulder no good. And if I'm off work, you don't get statutory sick pay for a while. You have to, explain why you're injured. And if I have a non-work related injury, I'm in serious doo-doo with work. I'll be like, why have you done that to yourself? Well, but one of my work colleagues, as I say, does play ice hockey. Work know about it. There's a couple other lads who play football. One of them is also a football coach as well. But yeah, I gave up at the age of 21. I gave up rugby at the age of 21. My shoulder, my neck, and my ankle are wrecked. I'm now 30. Yeah, I would love to go back and play, but there is just no way physically that I'm in a good enough shape to do that and have a decent quality of living, especially with the job that I do. I just like this. There's no way that it's viable physically for me or health wise, especially the fact that I actually need a shoulder operation as a worst case scenario, but also best case scenario, because then it fixes my shoulder and then I'm in less pain. But then I'll need multiple operations, and that's just something that I've got to factor in. And I don't have private health insurance. I am quite literally reliant on the state health service, and as it is right now, I prefer not to go into hospital. And I prefer not to be off work. I actually like working. I think it does me good up here as well, going to work. If I was off work, I'll go mad. I would go mad. I'll be able to do loads of YouTube videos, but I'll be like crippled, basically. I would literally be moping around doing nothing, and that's something that I don't want. And being off work will also affect me getting another place, because the inability to work, while yes, you get statutory sick, and I won't lose my job, it's just not what you want when you're looking for a place to live and your income, and you have to state your income and then be like, oh, you're not working at the moment, but you are contracted. Yeah, I'm recovering from an operation. It doesn't look well for a landlord going, is this guy going to be, able to... Oh no, watch me go mad. I think the channel's watched me go mad over the last 3 years. Completely off my rocker. I don't think, no, it's not. I don't think it would be interesting. I think it'd be quite worrying, actually. When I say go mad, I would literally be doing live streams for like 10 hours. and you don't want to watch me for 10 hours. You would go mad. Watching me for that period of time would drive you insane. Plus, my whiteboard would come out and I'll be like whiteboard madness, and I'll make loads of magnets and I'll be writing everywhere, and then I'll probably buy something on the internet like nuclear warhead or something, take over the world, become a maniacal dictator. I would probably try and play 6 sports at the same time. I'll probably have multiple screens going, and then I'll be like, absolutely, the vein will be going, and I'll be screaming, and I'll be trying to keep up to date with all the scores, and it would just become, it would probably become an episode of Criminal Minds. It'd be funny. But what sport am I watching this weekend? Probably catch a bit of the NASCAR. Probably catch up with some of the NHL games, because we're coming into the playoff run now, post trade deadline. But in reality, probably not a lot. There's a couple of videos I've got to do. I've got some more. I've got some NFL jerseys that one of my work colleagues and a subscriber, who's a work colleague of mine, has given to me. So I've got to do a video on them and add them to the collection. I've got to do some videos on a few sporting stories. I think the coronavirus is one, and FIFA's president Infantino coming out and saying it will affect football. We have to look at Maria Sharapova and her retirement. There's a couple other stories, rumbling on, but actually, to be honest, apart from the regular season football and all that, there's not really a lot going on. It's a shame there's no FA Cup or Challenge Cup on at the moment. But it's annoying that there's a break in the Six Nations yet again. I would rather have it all bang, all 5 games, all 5 weeks done, keep it short and sweet. But they like having these bye weeks. So I think I'll have a lazy one this week, and I think I'm just gonna have a look at a few of the sports stories going on. I've got a busy evening. I've got a fancy dress party to go to, a birthday party to go to. And my mate's pub's closing down, so we're giving it a send off. I've got a friend staying over because, I don't want to. Well, she's kipping in my bedroom, and I'm kipping on the sofa because she's decided to be on the sauce tonight, and I'm not letting her ride home on her motorbike because the weather's atrocious, and so we're not allowing her to do that. So I've got a busy night tonight, and then I've got to start packing up my flat and moving stuff out over the next few days. I've got 8 weeks to do it, but I want to do it as quickly as possible, get as much out as possible, and then work out the sorting out of bills and loose ends. So I'm going to have a bit more of an organisation weekend, I think. But Bath Bristol. That'll be a good game. That'll be a very, very good game. West Country derby, in a manner of speaking, a local derby. I'm not a fan of either side, but a friend of mine does play for Bath. My mate Max Laheath, he's a prop. So I'm secretly rooting for Bath, even though I'm not a Bath or Bristol fan, really. I support neither team, but as a neutral, I would love to go watch a game like that. I've been lucky enough to watch a couple of the London doubleheaders at Twickenham. I've been lucky enough to watch the Tetley Cup final in 1999. Johnny Wilkinson's first piece of silverware, by the way. Check it out. I've been lucky to watch some top flight rugby union in my time. I've also been lucky to watch a lot of top flight football in my time as well, and Test cricket. So I've been lucky enough to have seen that in my more formative years. But as I say, the cost of going to sport is prohibitive. And this is where the governing bodies and the league organisers and the teams themselves need to look at their ticket pricing, their concession stands, deals they can do, the cost of it. I haven't been at ice hockey because this season much because I've moved, but now I'm moving back to where I was living before. I might be able to catch a game before the season's over. Might be. Might. Doubtful though. But I might have to wait till next season. Which is a shame, but at the same time, I can't complain. It's actually helped me financially not going to sport, although I think I'll buy a season ticket for this coming ice hockey season. Because I'm aiming to live a bit more locally to where I. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your dad dying, but you mentioned that before, your dad passing away. I mean, I was lucky in the sense that my dad left me some money as well. It's not a nice thing to have to go through that. I've done it. I've gone through it. But enjoy the day out. I think your dad would have wanted you to enjoy the day out, but it's like having a naughty little treat, isn't it? Watching a sporting event now these days, rather than going week in week out every home game like back in the day. It's sometimes seen as a bit of a naughty little treat, and that's I think where sport needs to get the balance right with being a business and making as much money as possible, and also selling out their stadiums and arenas to the fans at a reasonable cost, because I think we're going too far in the way of making as much money as possible and not enough in balancing it with filling the stadium, having a healthy fan base, a happy fan base, and encouraging the next generation of players and the next generation of fans to then bring their kids to the game. I think we are getting to a point where we've gone too far in making as much money as possible and not enough in keeping it sustainable for fans and the long-term health of said sport, with the player wages going through the roof, yet fans' wages stagnating. I think we have to get that balance right, and this is where football's gone wrong. This is where rugby union and rugby league are going wrong. We could see ice hockey in this country start to go the same way. We have to get the balance between making as much money as possible and the fan enjoyment there. And I think he would want you to be happy going. I mean, I haven't been to a football match since before my dad passed away. My dad was a massive football fan. That doesn't mean I don't still have a love for the sport. I love it less than I did for other reasons. But I look at the cost. The cost is what is prohibitive for me to go watch the London Broncos play in the Championship this season. Last season, the cost for them playing the Super League, it was prohibitive, absolutely prohibitive. And for me, that's a shame. I had the money to go in the sense that I could have gone, but I needed to save money at the time. I wish I hadn't have moved now. I would have probably had a lot of money and I would have really been able to go to a lot more sporting games this season. And I've worked out that, yeah, there's only a couple of certain sports that I can afford to watch, which is my local ice hockey team or teams, and maybe being lucky enough to go see London Irish play or the London Broncos, London Scholars play. But in basic terms, it is too prohibitive. And that is a massive, massive shame. It's becoming too cost prohibitive for sports fans. And the so-called TV deals that are meant to be magical and pump all this money back into these sports aren't actually doing what they should be. And grassroots sport is struggling. And player wages are not sustainable. And ticket prices aren't sustainable. They can't keep rising at the rate they are above inflation because wages are not catching up. Economically, and the political future of this country is very uncertain over the next couple of years about what the state of the economy is going to be like. It's one of them. We are at a crossroads when it comes to professional sport about which direction sports take, and the financial health of the sports as well. Really at a crossroads. They cannot keep getting the wages they're getting and the transfers and the ticket prices. It cannot continue if the sports are to be viable, because then you're going to have half empty stadiums as a regular, not as an occasional thing. That's where we're going to end up. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. I've had a real great discussion. I will be planning some videos, most likely later today or tomorrow, to do with the coronavirus affecting sport. Maria Sharapova and her retirement, and a few other bits and pieces. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate all your comments and questions, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.